Hello, and welcome to Beyond the Limb, where we explore physical therapy evidence, expertise, and innovation in limb loss and limb difference care. I'm your host, Will Riddick, and I'm a physical therapist focused on improving care for patients with limb loss and limb difference. In today's episode, we're taking an international perspective on professional collaboration and specialty practice development in limb loss and limb difference rehabilitation. Strong professional organizations can play a major role in helping unify clinicians around shared goals and creating a professional identity within a specialty area. Today, we'll be discussing the history and impact of the British Association of Chartered Physiotherapists and Amputee Rehabilitation, commonly known as BACPAR. BACPAR has played a major role in bringing together physiotherapists working in limb absence rehabilitation across the United Kingdom while helping support education, professional standards, advocacy, networking, and interdisciplinary collaboration. We'll also explore how BACPAR has worked alongside organizations such as the Chartered Society of Physiotherapy and the National Health Service, and what lessons may apply to the future growth of limb loss and limb difference practice communities within the APTA, or American Physical Therapy Association, and the United States healthcare system. My guest today is Mary Jane Cole. Mary Jane is a physiotherapist with decades of experience in limb absence rehabilitation across clinical practice, education, research, and professional leadership. A longtime member and former committee leader of BACPAR, she has helped shape physiotherapy practice through clinical guidelines, educational initiatives, research, and much more. Although now officially retired, Mary Jane continues to support education, journal editing, and the advancement of limb absence rehabilitation, bringing a wealth of experience and a lifelong passion for improving care for people with limb loss. Mary Jane, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Will, and thank you so much for inviting BACPAR to contribute to your series of podcasts. It's a privilege to meet you, and it's a privilege to be here representing BACPAR. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm excited. First of all, tell me a little bit about yourself, kind of a little bit about your background. I gave a little bit of introduction there, but kind of, a little introduction for you.
Yes, well, I became a physiotherapist some years ago. I decided to leave Scotland, place of birth, where I've returned to go to London, and I qualified as a physiotherapist at St Thomas's Hospital. My first job was at Barts, St Bartholomew's, also in London, where I did what I'm sure you do in the States, a series of rotations as a junior physiotherapist. And I remember one specifically, trauma and orthopedics, where I met an amputee who made a huge impression on me as a person, but also the rehab process, and also the physiotherapist who was supervising me, who was a very noted physiotherapist of high caliber in the field. So this made an impression. I then traveled for a year or so, and I came back to London, and I worked at Queen Mary's Hospital, Roehampton, also in London. Now, you may know the name Roehampton. It's been well known, Queen Mary's Hospital, Roehampton, for many, many years. In fact, since World War I, particularly for its role in supporting people who had lost their limbs during the war, during conflict, particularly in the role of prosthetic rehabilitation. And his reputation continued to this day. And it was probably one of very few prosthetic centres. And now it's one of 5 in London. In fact, there's about 44 regional centres across England, Wales and Northern Ireland. And I worked there, and I continued with my rotations, and I had the opportunity to act up on what we called the limb surgical unit. So it was trauma and vascular patients with limb loss. And thereafter, I did a lot of work with those patients, post-operative, early prosthetic management, later prosthetic management, and that role became established for me. I did a few other roles as well, but I came back to that and worked on that for a long time. One particular role was supporting physiotherapists who were working in relative isolation across London as a regional therapist, and that was a very satisfying job. I came back to Roehampton, and then I did a short stint working for the Chartered Society of Physiotherapy as a professional advisor. And then I went into education. I'd always really enjoyed supporting students on placement with us, with the amputees, and also supporting my colleagues with their professional development. So I went into education, and I was very fortunate that I actually had capacity in that job to do a little bit of work still in the NHS. I'd put my uniform on. The university was actually in a hospital site. So I put my uniform on if they needed me, and I went down and gave a little bit of advice, reassurance, and so on. Also a little bit of work in private practice. I did a little bit of medical legal. I also was very lucky to have the opportunity then and beforehand to do a little bit of work abroad, overseas, taking my amputee rehab skills and doing mostly working alongside clinicians in country, doing a little bit of reporting, evaluating of a service, and also some education. So I've done a huge range of things, and as you say, I'm still doing a little bit of work for BACPAR in terms of sub-editing and a little bit of support for students on placement. That's me.
I love it. That's such a amazing collection of experience to have gone through, and also to kind of just like help support uh, practice development in so many different ways too. You were talking about this, how there used to be only very limited number of specialty centers, and how that has expanded across sort of different regions of the country. How did that come to be? I'm curious.
Well, it's a very good question. And actually, after the First World War, I don't actually know entirely the history, how it evolved, but invariably it would have evolved because of those patients would have actually gone back to their home and there would have been some kind of prosthetic service rather than returning always to Roehampton. But a significant movement, particularly pertinent to BACPAR, was something called the McCall Report, which happened in the 1980s, which took a big review of the prosthetic delivery, prosthetic service in the country. And it decided that there needed to be some improvement. So the artificial limb and appliance centres became disability services centres. And there were more of them and also more integrated with AHPs. So we were working much more closely with our OT colleagues, the prosthetists and so on. There was a much more of a merge. And it was through that review, overhaul of prosthetic services, as I say, that BACPAR came about with some like-minded physios getting together in the late 80s, thinking we need to share our experience, we need to reach out, we need to get together, because remembering, of course, that there's a relative to other groups of patients, amputees are small numbers, and so often physios would be working on their own in isolation. So important to actually have that, some kind of support network, and that's how it started.
Yeah, that's a really neat. And I almost see some similarities to things that I see even here in the States of just recognition of some holes in practice that are currently there. And I think it's such an interesting movement to see. I'm curious, as far as like when it was originally starting and, recognizing maybe some practice gaps, are you kind of aware, like what did those challenges look like early on? Or like what was like that initial, maybe some of the first initiatives of BACPAR?
Perhaps, it's a very good point. I was probably, when it all started, although I was an early member, I wasn't in that particular group. And I think I remember the late 80s, early 90s, I was on maternity leave and so on. But I'm suspecting that maybe something that prompted this idea of supporting education, supporting the development of people in working with amputees, was perhaps patients coming to the prosthetic centre, and they needed perhaps a little bit more physical preparation in order to take advantage of their prosthesis, possibly. It's a very good question, and I probably need somebody else here to beside me answering that. But clearly, when you work in isolation, you need that peer support. You need that assurance. Am I doing the right thing? But equally important for us to be able to support people and say, well, try it this way. How about that? Have more confidence in doing this. But only with education and support is that going to happen. So that was really the crux of BACPAR. And in fact, I might this quote, we had to work, that group wanted to develop this network, this what was called a clinical interest group at the time. It then became known as a professional network. The CSP, the Chartered Society of Physiotherapists, Physiotherapy, provided structure. And one in that structure was a constitution. So basically its aims, if I may just quote what it was early on, and is very much the same. Yes, it says, BACPAR supports the promotion of evidence-based practice and research, is committed to education, and provides a network for the dissemination of best practice in pursuit of excellence and equity whilst maintaining cost effectiveness.
I'm curious, do you feel like that, in terms of, looking at that, reflecting that as an early vision, how has that changed over time, or even what you've seen as an early member, kind of seeing how that's kind of developed, has that become kind of more official in terms of, you mentioned a clinical interest group, has it changed structurally?
I think it has, because it took a few years to get it going, and the constitution obviously was there. And then there was an inaugural meeting where a committee was, people were invited or offered to be a committee member. So there was that structure. And with each of those committee roles, there was an expectation to perhaps lead on something or to explore something and to bring it back to the table. Committee meetings continue to meet. They continue to meet twice a year, and there is obviously communication between those meetings. But to most importantly, to share it to the membership, to be seen for those people working with amputees, benefits of actually being part of an organization like this. And so I think that's very much, I think, the philosophy all the way through. And it continues to be that source of peer support and networking.
In relation to the CSP, which is kind of the, I guess a more formalized body representing physiotherapists across the board within the UK. What does that relationship look like between CSP and BACPAR?
Okay, well, so basically, I suppose in some ways it's sort of a framework, but actually we've become more autonomous as we have in practice, in the sense that there was a point when they gave us capitation fees for the numbers of members, but now we don't. We actually, we can apply for certain funds for certain research projects and things like that, but we generate through our membership fee money in order for bursaries and so on. But the CSP reaches out to us as a network, along with, there are probably about 25 to 30 other networks within Charter Society. And they reach out to us for us to support some of their developments, some of their policies, recently there's been a piece of work on support worker handbook, and I'm pretty confident that somebody from BACPAR will have looked at the document and given some feedback. There's been quite a lot of collaboration with the CSP over the years, looking at documents and with other bodies as well. But yes, fundamentally, that's almost like a sort of bit of that almost structure and that professionalism, particularly when we're thinking about things like social media and communication to people. That communication needs to be professional, and ultimately we are part of a professional body which supports us, and so there may be representation of BACPAR to go to particular meetings that the CSP has around networks, face-to-face, online, and so on. So there is a link, but equally BACPAR can make many decisions on its own and does so.
Very neat. Yeah, within like the American Physical Therapy Association, we have like different specialties, different sections of things. Currently, limb loss is more of like what we call a special interest group, which is kind of more a smaller kind of group. It's not necessarily has like that as much of a formal recognition as I guess BACPAR would have, or as much autonomy as like BACPAR might have. But it's neat to hear how those things, it sounds very much in like what we would see as like almost like sections or something like that. And with the other like 25 I'd say that you said, and how that works is really, really kind of neat.
What is interesting, I just wanted to say, actually, because of all the other networks, not every network knows of BACPAR. We are relatively small. There are smaller ones, and there are very big ones, like musculoskeletal networks, Physiotherapists, the neuro, and so on, and probably Agile, which is the one for older people. And what was interesting is that in our annual conferences, there are often themes. And very often, certainly when I was on the committee, is it appropriate for, was it relevant for actually the BACPAR member to present something? And often it might not have been, which is a shame in some respects, because they would be representing, one, their work within amputee rehabilitation, but also representing BACPAR, and other people in the audience will hear about it. So it's just a thought which has crossed my mind recently, because a couple of people were at a conference representing BACPAR, not necessarily presenting, but actually mentioned back to the committee that actually some people weren't aware of us. So there's still always work to do to reach out. I think what's important is that we reach out, or people who need support with working with people with limb loss, limb absence, working in this field can know where to contact us for support.
Yeah, most definitely. And that's the whole point of it. Yeah, is to
Yeah.
get that
Yes.
connection, to build those resources.
Mm.
And just kind of, this is another kind of structural question. Is so BACPAR is a separate entity from CSP. They have two separate entities unto themselves.
Yes and no, but we are British Association of Chartered Physiotherapists in Limb Absence Rehabilitation. So the chartered physiotherapy is important. Now, not every member is a physiotherapist. A member of the CSP. Majority are, and if I'm right in thinking, I think a certain percentage need to be. But we also have non-physios members. We have international members too, who clearly aren't members of the CSP. So it is fundamental to us being a professional network.
Gotcha.
And we could equally in turn contact the CSP about getting a bit of guidance, perhaps about recruiting people, members. And in fact, just today, there was an email in my inbox with somebody from the CSP reaching out to networks, reaching out to members saying, would it be useful to have an induction pack for people coming onto a committee? Because they're often approached and saying, how do we do this? What members should we have on the committee? What do we do about social media and so on? So they are a resource in turn for us as a network. We are for our clinical colleagues and are those working in research and amputee rehab, but the CSP is a resource for us.
I'm curious in terms of like the relationship with BACPAR and kind of within the NHS. So I'm kind of looking at this in terms of like the healthcare system within the United States is very much kind of disjointed. I think is a good way of saying that. And so oftentimes having like continuity of care, particularly in limb absence, is very challenging. Getting recognition of like somebody who has experience in this area of practice is very challenging for patients and clinicians alike. I mean, I can't even tell you how many times I've had a physical therapist reach out to me and say, hey, do you know anybody who specializes in this area that lives close to name a city? So I'm curious in terms of the relationship of BACPAR within the NHS and in terms of how it plays a role in terms of like offering, like helping to develop services and also helping for maybe even like patients to help find services.
Yeah. Well, yes, the majority of people with limb loss are treated in the NHS, certainly initially, whether it's a result of trauma, vascular disease, infection, whatever it might be. And the majority of patients will go if they are suitable and meet the criteria to use a prosthesis functionally and safely, they will go to a prosthetic centre. And so there is a strong link there. And as I say, there's regional centres, and any region may be actually supporting various other hospitals, NHS hospitals. So patients will come there, and then they will either come as an outpatient, or some places they might have inpatient beds, there's a range of different sort of services, but largely it is NHS driven, whether it's the staff are in a hospital setting, in the prosthetic setting, and also in the community once patients are being discharged. There are those patients who perhaps have had a traumatic amputation and are going through the other thing. I also have done a little bit of medical legal work. And this makes me say that there are those patients who perhaps have an insurance claim and actually may choose to actually be seen privately, because they may have the option of having a prosthesis, which the NHS, while it provides a fantastic amount of prosthetics and resources for patients, it may be that actually that patient can get something sooner, or something which is a little bit beyond the scope of within the finances of the NHS. And so we'll go into private practice. And there are probably, I would say, my feeling is that there are more physios working in that. Now, they might be coming straight from physio practice with amputees in NHS, or they may possibly come in from an MSK background and they're expanding their service to include amputees. The ones I'm familiar with they're all amputee experienced physios working with patients who are mostly, as I say, insurance claims or have chosen to go down that route. But the link with the NHS is enormous. Now, majority, I would say, we've got about 350 members, and so the majority of who are physios. And I would say majority of them are working in the NHS. How many of those, and those who have come from that background into private practice, will, I'm sure, be. But it might be that we still need to source those who are perhaps with other specialist skills to pull them into BACPAR as well, because they've got skills that we can learn from. You know, your musculoskeletal specialists. I mean, a lot of us have perhaps got a lot of experience, and there may be some who specialize in amputees who've had a neuro background, but who knows? But it'd be nice to actually get more of those other specialized physios within the BACPAR community.
So a lot of times, patients, let's say they have an initial amputation and they go through these initial services. So maybe they go to one of these specialty centers through an NHS hospital, and they, kind of receive initial services. This is obviously a lifetime condition. And so, let's say somebody returns back to their home community, and maybe a year or 2 years down the road, they are looking for services once again. How do they, does BACPAR have a role in helping patients to identify certain clinicians that they may be able to see privately even?
Possibly if patients seek that. Largely, the regional centres will, as I say, support various NHS hospitals, acute settings, and community-based settings. But it may be that if a person particularly wants to go down the private route, depending on where they live, they, and also perhaps it may be personal preference, go and see this particular clinic or another clinic. But yeah, from a practical point of view, somewhere which is accessible for them is important. And it may be that they go there through the medical legal system. It may be that the people who are doing the expert reports may be based in a particular centre, and that patient may go there if it's reasonably practical, because crossing London, for example, takes hours, so it may not be practical for some people.
For sure. I know also that within kind of BACPAR's leadership, there are certain leadership roles across different regions. How does that work? How does that division of that work, and what benefit does that play for the organization?
Well, that's within the committee. Within BACPAR, there is a committee of which there is a chair, a vice chair, a research officer, education officer, all various different roles, journal officer, social media, PRO, and so on. Lots of roles. Now, also working within on the committee gives people an opportunity to have a leadership role. And this, again, the other thing we have to remember that all this work is voluntary, but it may well be that experience contribute to someone's professional development. In fact, it will do, without a doubt. It will be very good on their CV. And like everything, clinicians are wanting to progress their career. And there are opportunities for people with certain experience. They may go into education like I did, research, management. And certainly there's quite a lot of people within BACPAR with all their experience in clinical practice, but also with a committee, that have actually had opportunities to develop their role, become allied health professional leads for a trust or a prosthetic centre or something like that. So there are professional opportunities as well as the volunteering role of being on the committee.
So having different regions of practice, what are some resources that BACPAR either produces or conferences that help to tie in members and kind of unify this scope of practice?
Absolutely. Well, what BACPAR has is regional networks as well. So the BACPAR, so there'll be regions, literally geographical regions, and they are encouraged to do some study days. It may be 1-2 a year face-to-face, it may be online, but generally face-to-face. And that's a great way of networking. And some of them may have very small numbers of members and may be quite big. And you're not restricted because you live or work in one region, you can't go across into another county and go and visit that. So that's a really important thing. And it's particularly good when new people come into post who might need some basic skills. And the other important thing is that we need to address the people who are working in vascular surgery who may not see their patient using a prosthesis, and at that end as well. So both ends of the spectrum. So meeting a range of needs. And then formally, BACPAR once a year has a 2-day conference. It used to be 2 one-day conferences a year. And for the last few years, we've done that in collaboration with the Vascular Societies of Great Britain and Ireland. Before that, it might be, say, 2 study days, one in spring and the autumn, or 2 together, and there might be a theme around research, there might be a clinical practice, vascular, whatever. That 2-day conference continues, but under the umbrella of the Vascular Societies. But that can include, presentations reflecting work with patients who have had sepsis, patients who have had trauma, and so on. So it's not limited to vascular disease. But what's great is because we are able to network with a lot of people, bearing in mind the majority of patients who lose their limbs in this country, as would be in the States, is vascular disease, we're meeting those specialists now, whether they're the vascular nurses, the surgeons, and so on. And that's a great opportunity for networking and for heightening our profile. And so that's great. So coming along to that at a reasonable rate, as a membership rate, great learning opportunities, practical workshops, and a program that's going to hopefully meet often sort of concurrent running of perhaps some workshops and some talks on different areas of practice, platform presentations, poster presentations. There's a lot going on. It's great, and sometimes a bit of a get together for regional reps. Another thing that's evolved over the last few years is something called the roundtable discussions, and that's really great for actually hearing everybody's voice. Because you know what it's like, there's a presentation and it's a few people who might ask questions and you're burning to ask a question, but you don't have the confidence or feel it's appropriate or whatever. But round tables allows everybody to have a say around a topic which is hopefully relevant, and it in turn sparks ideas, possibly for research, for audit, and so on. You were asking, again, sorry, going off tangent a little bit, but the additional resources that we provide, of course, are the guidelines. So we've had 3 editions of the pre and post-op management, physiotherapy management, and also the physiotherapy prosthetic management. We've had 2 editions of our outcome measures, what we call a toolbox, and that's being updated at the moment. We've got education, so pre-reg education guidelines, and they're in the process of going to be updated shortly. Various tools and things also like particularly helpful for somebody who's got less experience, a piece of a leaflet saying, so your patient has had an amputation. So a bit of a pointer for people, and all these are available to members on the website and more. Journals is another big source of resource, and I say a journal, it used to be called a newsletter, and it probably started with about 25 to 30 pages, and now it's about 60 pages. A little bit of advertising in that, but a whole range of things, from case studies, from patient reflections on their rehabilitation, from research, people working abroad, all sorts of experiences. Fantastic.
It's neat how I often think about like organizations like this, and I think one of the things that I hope to eventually have in terms of like seeing here in the States is to have kind of like a home, I guess, and
Yes.
saying like a home for that area of practice. And it feels like BACPAR has done such an excellent job of doing that, of providing resources, connecting clinicians, also networking within the health system, networking within other providers. I think it's so interesting to hear about. I do want to ask a little bit about we kind of talked a little bit about this before we started recording, but the guidelines. What does that kind of incorporate for any listener who may not know about those particularly?
I think a lot of work.
Yeah,
It
guidelines.
does. And those who lead it and contribute to them put a lot of time aside and learn a lot. So it's looking at the evidence base to support the practice that we have. So we're looking critically at the papers, of which there are actually more than you think, but actually looking at up to date, each review that comes out, looking at more recently published things. And it may be prosthetic, it may be vascular, it may be infection, all sorts of things. And so selecting things that we think are appropriate for whether it's a pre-op, post-op management or prosthetic management. And so we look at those and we critique these. And then we also have a Delphi approach as well. So we're looking at expert opinion as well. So it's a collaborative, there's a group, usually a working group, and then there's very much out to the members to ask their views on things where there perhaps isn't some evidence. And so, but representing current views on a particular aspect. So that's quite a lot of work. And again, everybody's doing that in a voluntary capacity, all the pieces of work. But it's, you learn a lot. And in fact, what we did when we're in the journal, our journal, was that we would select some new pieces of evidence and write a little summary and a sort of critique, and actually encourage people to actually have a journal club in their departments and to look at that piece of work and how relevant it is to their particular practice. And the other important thing about the guidelines is that use it as an audit tool. So review an aspect, there's lots of aspects. So review an aspect of the guidance and look at your practice. What are we doing well? What could we do better? And then collecting that as data and looking and reviewing it. It's a bit like a reflective practice process. Review it. Have we made a change? We saw there was a need for a change. Have we done that? Reviewing it.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm hearing so many like opportunities for growth. Like there are voluntary roles, but there's resources, there's opportunities to, whether through conferences, different meetings, round tables, as you mentioned. Yeah, so many neat opportunities. I'm curious about, for a clinician, for a physio, is there kind of like any way, whether they're practicing within an NHS or privately, is there a way for them to, like, I guess, highlight their skills in this area? Like, is there kind of any recognition of like specialty, kind of either within BACPAR or within CSP or anything of that sort?
Not specifically. That said, we've had something we haven't really necessarily talked. We talked a little bit about collaboration, but something that BACPAR is slightly separate with, but works in collaboration with it, which is SPARC, the Scottish Physiotherapy Amputee Research Group. And that was started possibly around the same time as BACPAR started. And the lead then received a fellowship for her work. She was a researcher, she's a physiotherapist researcher, and she received work. Another person who stepped into her shoes was voted Therapist of the Year in Scotland. And then another colleague she's done a lot of work with our guidelines, and she initiated the very first guideline. She also does a lot of other voluntary work outside of amputees specifically, and she was awarded what's called as the MBE, which is a member of the British Empire. So there are these things that recognize really good practice, passion, best practice, and encourage, supporting the development of others to enhance the quality of what we do with our patients.
We mentioned a bunch of these resources, certainly guidelines, things that are kind of applicable across the board. Are you aware of any kind of resources that BACPAR might have that may support kind of promoting specialty care, promoting almost like professional membership or professional collaboration?
I'm wondering, I'm thinking all the things that we provide. Yes, we've got exercise lists, we've got information for people working with patients with vascular disease and say patients had an amputation, or guidelines and things like that. I'm not sure if there is. What we do is when we go to ISPO, for example, International Society of Prosthetics or Orthotics, no, whether it's a UK one, an international one, we'll try and take our banners, okay? So we shout loud, okay? And I think, pretty sure there are badges now, T-shirts, to say, this is who we are. This is us promoting, and leaflets about BACPAR. Yes, that's right. We used to have leaflets. Of course we did. And showcasing hard copies of the guidelines, of everything, and the journal. Now, these are all available online, but they're also in hard copy too, which is great. I think, at a conference, at a stall, there's nothing better than looking at something and getting a feeling of something, particularly you pick it off the shelf in clinical practice rather than actually having to go onto the computer. So there is that. We have a little logo as well. I mean, we have this logo here, which is quite nice, which is quite straightforward, and that was actually devised right at the very beginning, and it's again with a banner and it's things like that, and as physios, we like to talk to people, so we'll draw people in to come and talk to us and tell them about us, and I think also the other thing is, because we collaborate with our colleagues, whether they're prosthetists, rehab consultants, OT colleagues, collaborating with them, and they can also spread the word. Particularly at an international conference, go and see so-and-so is on the stall there, go and speak to the physios. We would also say, go and speak to the prosthetists, or go and speak to that manufacturer for that particular type of prosthesis, for example. So I think there's a sense of a lot of mutual support across the professions working with people with limb loss.
We mentioned the International Society of Prosthetics and Orthotics. Are there other kind of groups that may represent prosthetists or occupational therapists that you work directly with?
We haven't. We used to be something called the ULPOT and LULPOT, the upper limb OTs and the lower limb OTs. Traditionally in the UK, the OTs have worked with upper limb loss, but actually I'm really excited to say that actually physios are getting much more involved with upper limb loss. That's been a sort of particular interest of mine. So we work with them, and their organisation has changed a little bit. And to be perfectly honest, I can't remember what it's called. But yes, there is certainly, particularly when looking at outcome measures, for example. So the patient who's a wheelchair user and isn't going to use a prosthesis, they will be there. Our OT colleagues are very often the ones who will actually issue a wheelchair and actually have a lot of involvement with these patients, and in terms of the outcome measures being functionally safe and so on from a wheelchair. And also with our prosthetists, the BAPO, British Association of Prosthetists and Orthotists. We have done a collaborated conference with our ISPO colleagues, of which there are a lot of BACPO members. And we certainly are in communication with them, as BACPAR is with a lot of the charities as well, because a lot of the patients are encouraged to join a charity for, again, some peer support. And I think there's a feeling that BACPAR also wants to hear more of what our users, prosthetic users, non-limb users, our amputee population wants from us, perhaps feedback on their rehab experiences, but also, what they feel the research could be, avenues for research. So communication with our colleagues, and of course, there's lots of research going on, and often it's going to be multidisciplinary. So there's an interesting trial at the moment. It's called the Hamlet study, Hamlet trial, and it's looking at an area which I'm sure perhaps it's the same in the States. A little bit of controversy between the benefits of being a transfemoral or a knee-disc articulation, and looking at that through various outcomes and over time. And the physios are key investigators in that, and often we'll be inviting other team members to participate, and equally our colleagues will be inviting BACPAR members to collaborate in some research.
Now, you've been a long-term member of BACPAR. You've had many roles that we kind of already discussed, and you still have this relationship with it. You're still kind of going. I'm curious, after this time that you've had with it, what keeps you there? What excites
Yeah.
you? What drives you to kind of maintain that membership to continue to come back?
Well, I think it's a very strange thing being retired, in so much as I've had the privilege of having a fantastic experience career, really interesting. And I suppose my identity is a physio, first and foremost, but very quickly, when particularly somebody on the tennis court might say, "Oh, I've got this sore knee or shoulder," no, that's not my speciality. It's amputees, and I'm very proud of that. And I've met so many fantastic patients, and I've worked with so many interesting people of such high caliber. And also, the other thing I wanted to mention is that BACPAR has been involved with overseas work as well, which I've been privileged to go and work a little bit in small visits, but in a variety of countries and with BACPAR members. And we've done some collaboration with Humanity Inclusion, for example. So for me, it's BACPAR and amputee rehab is integral. It's part of my backbone, really. It's part of me, And I'll be walking down the street and saying, now, could their gait be better? Is it because they've got a sore ankle, or is it actually, they're an amputee? So it's everywhere for me.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
we're
think
all about physios.
that's right. Yeah, I think it's such an interesting thing because it's like it seems almost like part of identity in a way,
Yeah.
like of
Yeah.
having that deep connection to that area of practice, but also through that area of practice to also the organization itself too. I'm curious. Obviously, there's I'm sure new leadership that is coming in. There's new initiatives that are always kind of going along the way. But I think if as you kind of look on the broad picture of BACPAR, where it's come, where it's going, what would you say you kind of hope like the long term kind of legacy of BACPAR is for either clinicians or folks who've had amputations?
Well, ultimately, this is for the benefit of our patients. But another thing that BACPAR has been involved, has been a stakeholder in the Masters of Amputation Prosthetic Rehab in the University of Southampton. So more and more people coming who work with amputees, who are BACPAR members, have their masters, and some of those are going on and getting their doctorates. And so the profile of BACPAR increases because the weight of their work, and through doing a master's, they may do likely to do a research dissertation, which they will present on possibly on an international platform. And here's Physio's BACPAR. It's fantastic, and I think BACPAR is only going to want to encourage our members to continue that, but also encourage members at the other end to support them with their practice when they're new to it, and as I say, might be feeling slightly isolated, and also to encourage them to join into the committee working parties to gain experience about leadership roles, more about working with amputees, what we need to do, new guidelines, or updating something, or developing another piece of work that's going to ultimately benefit our patients. So I think the vision it's all about peer support. I mean, that's the bottom line. It's giving support. It's being heard, having a profile. Speaking loud enough. Strength in numbers. We're small, relatively small, but we can make an impact. I think we carry a bit of force there.
I think it's a great summary. Do you see any kind of like opportunities for like potentially other, mentioned there's international work that's done, but any like international collaboration between even like BACPAR or other physical therapy groups, maybe even like the APTA?
Yeah, why not? Absolutely. Indirectly, I say that I'm not on the committee. I am saying that, but I'm sure they'd be very receptive to that. I mean, we've got this fantastic medium of social media. There can be journal clubs with collab, within BACPAR, beyond BACPAR. We can share your experiences. What can we learn from you, and vice versa? I think there's all sorts of opportunities. It's a matter of somebody starting it, and let's give it a go. We've also had, the collaboration, I think, is really great. So it's a collaboration with Humanity Inclusion was partly to prepare, along with lots of other professional networks in the Chartered Society, prepare people to be deployed post sudden onset disaster, but also subsequently some of the BACPAR members, particularly in the education, under the education officer role, have developed some online resources for therapists in country, such as exercises, very straightforward, bearing in mind that a lot of these places won't have very much in the way of resources, plinths and equipment. So there's all sorts of collaboration, all sorts of different levels. And collaborating, learning from others is really important. Yep.
Yeah. If, let's say we have a listener who may feel a little bit isolated, may not be connected to professional organization, may not have a professional community around them. Do you have kind of like a key takeaway or a key message for that practitioner?
Yes, I think it would be explore what BACPAR can offer you. Come and don't be intimidated at all by perhaps seeing all the guidelines and the resources, but there's an opportunity to ask a straightforward question. We are available on social media, so it's LinkedIn, Facebook, and there's also something again with the Chartered Society, something called Interactive CSP, where people can pose a question and members will see that. It'll be people will be notified and they can respond. So it may be something about, where do I find this piece of equipment, or what should I do? And then also there's, sometimes the networking when you're face to face gives the opportunity for some informal mentoring. So somebody might be able to say, just give me a buzz, give me a ring, call sometime if you're a bit struggling. I mean, mentoring normally happens as a formal process through, supervision, particularly in the NHS, but informal mentoring, and it gives people an opportunity to say something which they may not say to their manager and say, look, I'm finding this a little bit hard. What would you help? What would you say? And then hopefully that person, without being judgmental, will say, give this a go, try that. And again, in a professional capacity, saying that clearly with their experience. But I think somebody who's inexperienced, if they can reach out and just ask those questions, can somebody give me an idea here? Or can I have a conversation with somebody?
There's a connection for them.
Yeah.
So, well, Mary Jane Cole, thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you.